The conference room on the 44th floor of Exchange Tower had a view of Lake Ontario that on clear mornings looked almost tender. But that February afternoon, the ice below sat gray and still, and Cameron Doucet stood alone at one end of a table built to make a person feel small. 6 members of the Wyndham Group occupied the other end. Monogrammed cufflinks measured silences, the particular stillness of people who had never once needed to rush. And at the center of it all, a thick document slid toward him by a lawyer who didn't bother to look up as he spoke. $750 million, the lawyer said, contingent upon full transfer of design authority and operational control. The number sat in the air. Cameron had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Hamilton, helping his father regrout bathroom tiles on weekends for extra cash. $750 million was not a number his life had been designed to receive. He turned the page. And that was when everything in the room rearranged itself, because buried beneath the careful language was the truth. They weren't buying his firm. They were keeping the shell of it and removing him from the inside. Founding consultant, an office with his name on the door, a title with no authority behind it, like a painted window in a brick wall. Before he could say anything, Victor Wyndham leaned back in his chair. He was 71, gray at the temples, with the kind of ease that came from decades of never once being told no. He studied Cameron the way a man studies a property before making an offer, not unkindly, but without seeing a person there. "You've built something singular," he said. "We mean that. But let's be honest with each other. You caught a wave. One extraordinary project. Men who catch waves don't always know how to navigate the open water that follows." A pause, quiet adjustments in seats, not laughter exactly, something more precise than that. Across the table, Rowena Wyndham didn't move at all. She was 45, Victor's eldest, and she watched Cameron with an attention that felt clinical, like she was measuring the distance between who he was and who he could be reshaped into. And that was the moment the humiliation arrived. Not loudly, not with any theater. It came in quietly, the way cold does through a window left slightly open. Slow, thorough, impossible to locate until you were already shivering. Cameron had been awake since 4 that morning. He'd driven into Toronto from Oakville before sunrise, dropped his daughter Lena at his sister's place while she was still half asleep, still clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd named Gerald for reasons she'd never once explained. 8 years old. She had his dark eyes and her mother's stubbornness and a habit of narrating her drawings aloud as she made them, as though the story and the picture had to arrive together or not at all. His hand moved without thinking. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled his phone out just far enough to see the lock screen. A photo of Lena from last October, standing in the leaves outside their front door, squinting into the sun, laughing at something just out of frame. He didn't know what she was laughing at. He'd been trying to remember for months. He looked back up. The Wyndhams were still waiting. The contract was still there. The number was still hanging in the air. But Cameron Doucet was no longer the man being assessed. He was the man deciding. He closed the folder. The sound was clean and deliberate in the quiet room. He pushed it back across the table with one hand. Not hard, just steadily, the way you return something that was never really yours to take. "Then this isn't the right arrangement," he said. His voice was level, almost quiet. "Because what you're asking me to give up is the only reason the thing you want to buy has any value at all." No one spoke. For the first time since he'd walked through the doors of that building, the room felt like it didn't entirely belong to the Wyndham family anymore. Cameron didn't look back as he crossed the lobby. The city hit him when the doors opened. February whined off the lake, sharp enough to make your eyes water before you'd decided whether you were sad or just cold. He stood on Bay Street for a moment. Taxis moved past. People walked with their chins tucked. The world had no opinion about what he'd just done. His phone lit up. A message from Lena's teacher, a reminder about the parent-teacher meeting he'd rescheduled twice already. The notification sat there, patient and ordinary, and it cut through the noise of the last hour more completely than anything else could have. He exhaled, tucked the phone away, walked toward the parking garage where his 10-year-old Subaru sat between 2 vehicles that had each cost more than his first mortgage. He drove to his sister's place to pick up Lena. She was at the kitchen table doing homework when he arrived, her tongue pressed against the inside of her cheek the way it always was when she was concentrating. She looked up, took him in the way children do. Not the suit, not the loosened tie, but his face, the weather behind his eyes. "You look like the time we got lost in Algonquin," she said. He pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "How so?" "Like you don't know where you're going, but you're not scared yet." He didn't answer that. He looked at her homework instead. Long division, the numbers arranged in neat rows she'd already gotten mostly right. "You're better at this than I was," he said. She shrugged, unbothered. "Was your meeting bad?" "It was complicated." She nodded, returning to her page. "Complicated is okay," she said, more to the paper than to him. "Complicated just means it needs more time." He drove her home through the gray late afternoon, the highway moving slowly past the lake, the water the same color as the sky. He made pasta. She told him about a disagreement she'd had with her best friend over whether a story she'd written counted as realistic fiction if the main character could talk to birds. He told her it counted. She seemed satisfied with this. After she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop in the particular silence of a house at night. The furnace cycling on and off, a car passing outside, the weight of what he'd done settling in now that there was no one to hold it together for. The messages had been arriving since late afternoon. His studio manager, his project coordinator, 3 investors, 2 of them barely polite, and then a message from his CFO, Soren Macphail, that simply read, "Call me when Lena's asleep." He called. "Tell me there's something I don't know," Soren said without any opening. Soren was 53, had been with Cameron for 6 years, and had a voice like gravel wrapped in flannel, steady honest at every register. "There might be," Cameron said. "I need more than might be, Cam. We have 41 people on payroll. I need to know if I'm calling them in tomorrow morning or managing something else entirely." "Call them in." A long pause. "Okay," Soren said finally. "I trust you, but I need you to know that the margin is real. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the runway, and right now the runway is a lot shorter." "I know." "How much shorter?" "I'll know more in 48 hours. Another pause, this one heavier. "All right," Soren said, 48 hours. Cameron closed the laptop. He looked around the kitchen, the pasta pot still on the stove, Lena's backpack by the door, a drawing she'd abandoned on the counter before dinner, a house. A family of 2, built around routines that felt, most of the time, like enough. He thought about what he had. Not what the Wyndhams had offered, but what he'd actually built. The thing they hadn't fully understood when they put their offer together. 3 years ago, while designing the Lakeshore Civic Center project that had put his name on every architectural shortlist in the country, he had developed something quietly on the side. A structural analysis method, a proprietary approach to load distribution in high-density mixed-use buildings that reduced material waste by nearly a third without compromising integrity. He'd filed the patent application carefully. It had been granted 14 months ago. He had told almost no one. He hadn't been ready to use it yet. He'd wanted the right foundation first. Now, with the pressure closing in and the margin thinning, he understood something with the clarity that only arrives when there's no room left for comfortable thinking. The Wyndhams had come for him because of what they believed they understood about his value. They had been wrong about the full size of it. And that was precisely where everything could turn. At 5:17 in the morning, an email arrived from Wyndham Capital, subject line, re-terms, final position. He read it standing in his kitchen in socked feet, the coffee maker gurgling beside him, the window above the sink still dark. It was measured, professional, and entirely without warmth. Partners had been quietly contacted. A city permit review had been reopened on one of his current projects. Nothing accusatory, just procedural, the kind of language that bureaucracy used when it had been leaned on. 3 lines near the bottom read clearly, "We trust this clarifies the scope of what's at stake. We look forward to your reconsidered position." Cameron set the phone on the counter. He looked out at the snow in the backyard, undisturbed and gray in the pre-dawn light. Somewhere upstairs, his daughter was asleep with her rabbit. He picked up the phone again and sent 2 messages. Then he started making breakfast. By the time his team arrived at the studio that morning, he was already at his desk. Soren came in last, closed the door, sat down across from Cameron and waited. "They're applying pressure," Cameron said. "The permit thing is them, not the city." Soren nodded slowly. "How bad?" "Manageable if we move." "Move how?" "I'm going to show you something I should have shown you a long time ago." What followed in the next hour was, for Soren, the specific discomfort of realizing that the person you've been trying to protect had, in fact, been holding something that made the protection unnecessary. The patent documents. The method. The scope of its application to the kind of large-scale infrastructure builds that organizations like the Wyndham Group needed for their provincial pipeline contracts. Contracts worth 3 times what they'd offered Cameron for his firm. Soren was quiet for a long time after. "Then you've been sitting on this." "I was waiting." "For what?" "For someone to show me why I needed it." Soren leaned back in his chair and let out a breath that contained approximately 6 years of carefully managed CFO anxiety. "All right," he said. "Tell me what we're doing." Over the next 47 hours, the shape of things shifted. Not publicly, not with any announcement, but in the way that real movements always happen first. Quietly, through specific conversations between specific people who understood exactly what was being placed on the table. A call to a firm in Calgary that had been searching for a structural method to anchor their northern affordable housing bid. A conversation through a mutual contact with the director of infrastructure for a provincial transit authority that was about to issue an RFP for a system Cameron's method had been designed for without Cameron knowing it at the time. A technical summary sent to 2 international engineering partners who had apparently been waiting with considerable patience for something like this to exist. No press release, no investor memo, just the careful movement of real things toward each other in real time. When the invitation came from Wyndham Capital, requesting what they called a follow-up conversation, the language was the same, controlled, formal, precise. But something beneath the precision had changed frequency. Cameron could hear it the way you can sometimes hear a building settle. Not a dramatic crack, just a quiet acknowledgement that weight has shifted. He went back. He arrived 5 minutes early and was shown to the same conference room on the same floor, the same view of Lake Ontario, still gray, but the ice at the edges had begun to loosen the way it did in late February. Not broken, not thawed, just no longer completely fixed. He did not stand at the end of the table. He set his bag beside a chair near the middle, sat down, and waited. Victor Wyndham entered first, then Rowena, then 2 others Cameron recognized from the first meeting. There was a moment, small but legible, when Victor registered where Cameron was sitting. He adjusted, marginally, and took his own chair across the table. Nothing was said about it. Nothing needed to be. Rowena opened. "You've been busy," she said. Not warmth, but not dismissal either. Something closer to honest acknowledgement. "So have you," Cameron said. She held his gaze for a moment. The permit review was a procedural matter. I'm sure it was. Neither of them pushed further. Cameron opened his bag and placed a slim folder on the table. He didn't slide it across with any particular emphasis. He simply set it there. When they opened it, the room went through a shift that was not dramatic, not the kind that announces itself, but total. The kind that happens when something you believed you had fully mapped turns out to have a dimension you hadn't accounted for. What they were looking at was not a counterproposal. It was a portfolio, the patent documentation for the Doucet method, the Calgary Partnership Heads of Agreement, a provincial transit authority letter of intent, and a brief from an international structural engineering firm laying out the method's application scope across multiple sectors. Every document dated within the last 2 days, all of it real. Victor turned pages without speaking. His expression was the expression of a man who was very practiced at not showing what he felt, working harder than usual to maintain the practice. "You developed this during the Lakeshore build," Rowena said. It came out somewhere between a question and something she was working out for herself. "Alongside it. And you've never disclosed it." "Not until it made sense to." Victor set the folder down slowly. "You understand what this changes." "I do." The silence that followed was different from the silences in the first meeting. Not comfortable, not strategic. Genuinely uncertain. Which was, Cameron understood, the most honest thing that had happened in this room since the first time he'd walked into it. "You're not here to renegotiate the original terms," Rowena said. "No." "Then what are you here for?" Cameron had turned this answer over for 2 days, through pasta dinners and bedtime stories and the long, quiet hours at the kitchen table after Lena went to sleep, and he said it the same way he'd arrived at it. Without performance, just plainly. "A real partnership," he said. "My name on what I build, my decisions on how it gets built, a licensing structure on the method that reflects what it's actually worth to your infrastructure pipeline, and no more procedural reviews." He paused. "Those are the terms." Victor exhaled slowly through his nose. He turned and looked out at the lake for a moment. "You're asking us to operate differently than we've operated." "I'm asking you to build something you can't build without me," Cameron said, "and I'm telling you I'm willing to build it. Those are different things." Rowena was watching him with the same focused attention she'd had in the first meeting, but the calculation behind it had changed. She wasn't measuring how easily he could be reshaped into something more convenient. She was measuring something she hadn't expected to need to measure. "We'll need time to review the licensing terms," she said. "That's reasonable." Victor turned back from the window. He looked at Cameron for a long moment, not the evaluation of the first meeting, not a man appraising a property, but something more reluctant and more honest. A man who had miscalculated something significant, acknowledging it quietly, in the particular way some people can when they have no remaining alternative. "You're considerably more complicated than we anticipated," he said. "Most people are," Cameron replied. Rowena closed the folder and set it neatly in front of her. The gesture was small but specific. She was keeping it. She was not returning it across the table. "We'll be in touch by end of week," she said. Her voice was composed as it had been throughout, but there was something different in the weight of it now. Not warmth. Nothing so easy as that. Something more like the specific gravity of a conversation that has permanently altered the ground both people are standing on. Cameron nodded once. He picked up his bag. He stood. He walked to the door without looking back, not as a statement, but because there was nothing left in that room that he needed. The drive home took 40 minutes. He picked up Lena on the way. She'd apparently spent the afternoon at his sister's conducting what she described as a scientific investigation involving baking soda, food coloring, and a mixing bowl that was now apparently permanently orange. She climbed into the car mid-explanation of the methodology. He listened. He asked the right questions. He made the right turns. When they got home, she changed into her home clothes and settled at the kitchen table with her drawing supplies. A set of markers and a pad of paper she approached with more seriousness than most adults brought to their work. He made tea. He sat across from her and did not open his laptop. After a while, she held something up. "I made this while I was waiting," she said, "at Auntie Brigitte's." It was a drawing of a building, tall, detailed for an 8-year-old, with windows she'd cross-hatched carefully and a small figure standing in front of it. The figure had dark lines for hair. At the bottom, in her particular mix of printing and cursive, "My dad makes things that stay." He looked at it for a moment. "That's really good, Lena." "I know," she said, already reaching for another marker. "The windows took forever." He set it down carefully on the table beside him. Outside, the February dark had come the way it always did in Ontario, not gradually but all at once, as though someone had made a decision. The kitchen light made the room warm. The furnace ran. Somewhere down the street, a snowplow was working its way through. "Was your meeting better this time?" Lena asked, without looking up from the new drawing she'd already started. "Better," he said, "not finished, but better." She nodded, still drawing. "That's the right direction," she said, in the reasonable tone she used when she had considered something carefully and arrived at a conclusion. He almost laughed, almost told her she was right. Instead, he just sat there in the warm kitchen while she drew, and he didn't check his phone, and didn't open his laptop, and didn't do anything other than be exactly where he was. There would be terms to negotiate. There would be lawyers and licensing structures, and the careful management of investors who'd been very deliberate in their recent messages. There would be the permit review, which would resolve or need to be contested. There would be all the complicated machinery of something that wasn't finished yet, because it wasn't. He understood that clearly. But tonight Lena was drawing, and the tea was hot, and the building she'd sketched, the one she'd labeled with the most accurate description of him that anyone had ever written, arrived at entirely by accident, the way children get to truth. That building was still his. He had walked into that boardroom the first time as a man being evaluated. He had walked in the second time as something different. And whatever came next, whatever the Wyndhams decided by end of week, whatever was drafted in careful language by people paid to make things sound more certain than they were, he had not given away the part of himself that made the rest of it worth anything. Not for $750 million. Not for any number they could have written on any document in that room. His daughter was drawing at the kitchen table, and the rabbit named Gerald was watching from the counter, and outside the February snow was doing what February snow in Ontario always did, staying patient and indifferent until the season decided otherwise. He got up and started making dinner.